This story is about a love quadrangle, manipulation, and murder. Someone from this group will die, and experts will call it a crime. On May 13, 2005, investigators visited a house on the outskirts of Olympia, Washington, in search of a woman named Michelle Linehan. She was a successful individual with a master's degree in public administration and worked for the Washington State Ethics Board. In addition, Michelle was involved in charity work. At first glance, her personal life seemed perfect, a loving doctor husband and a beautiful daughter. But why were investigators from faraway Alaska interested in her? As it turned out, the reason was a decade-old murder that took place in the city of Anchorage. And as it became clear, Michelle Linehan had quite an interesting past, which we will now learn about. Michelle Linehan, named Michelle Hughes, was born in New Orleans. She was a bright and ambitious girl with big dreams. At the tender age of 16, Michelle decided to leave her hometown and go to New York City, aiming to build a career as a model. In the big city, she found a job, but her earnings did not meet her expectations. That's when Michelle realized that she needed to radically change her life, find a new job and marry a wealthy man. But first, it was necessary to get a higher education. To save money for tuition and find a potential husband, in 1994, Michelle moved to Anchorage, Alaska, and got a job as a dancer in a club. Why did Michelle choose Anchorage to earn money and find a husband? The fact is that in the 1990s, commercial fishing was thriving in Alaska and new oil fields were opening up. The city attracted businessmen, fishermen, and oil industry workers who had a lot of money and could afford to spend it on a charming young girl. At that time, Michelle was only 21. As we can see, Michelle was a determined and goal-oriented person, ready to take risks to achieve her goals. But will this approach to life pay off? I will tell you about it right now, but only to those incredible and wonderful people who subscribe to the channel, like this video, and write any comment right now so that as many people as possible can watch this video. Michelle wasn't the best dancer at the club, but she managed to earn a decent starting capital in a few months. She received from $1,000 to $3,000 per night, which made her the most in-demand girl in the establishment. But what exactly did Michelle do? You might think of something indecent, but no. She simply sat with clients in revealing outfits and had conversations with them. In my opinion, this approach to work looks rather dubious, but who am I to judge? In October 1994, a new client appeared at the club, Kent Lepping. He came to Alaska with the intention of engaging in commercial fishing. After meeting Michelle, Kent became her regular visitor. They spent hours in private conversations. Before leaving for Anchorage, Kent's parents gave him a considerable sum of money, which he spent on the charming Michelle without hesitation. Their relationship developed rapidly, and just a month after they met, Kent proposed to the girl. Interestingly, he did not tell his parents about Michelle's real profession. And here's what Kent's mother, Betsy, said about his chosen one.
She didn't love him the way he loved her. I have a suspicion that there were other men in Michelle's life.
Well, a mother's heart is rarely wrong. Kent moved into Michelle's house, and everything seemed to be wonderful. However, the girl did not quit her job at the club. In December 1994, a traveling salesman, Scott Hilk, visited there. He immediately noticed the attractive young dancer. Things went so far that Scott also settled in Michelle's house and later proposed to her. Now there were 3 of them living under one roof: Kent, Michelle, and Scott. A strange situation, isn't it? You probably have many questions. How did the men feel about such cohabitation? It's very simple. Michelle told Kent that Scott preferred men and hinted to Scott that Kent was gay. Thus, they were not concerned about rivalry. Michelle continued to dance at the club as it brought in a lot of money, and she was not going to give up such an income. And the grooms, it seems, did not mind. In the summer of 1995, a widower named John Carlin Roman III came to the establishment. He had lost his wife to cancer and was single-handedly raising his teenage son, John Carlin Roman IV. Yes, the boy was named after his father. Michelle approached John's table and they met. Their communication lasted a long time, and in August, John confessed that he was going to visit Amsterdam. Michelle exclaimed, "I dream of flying there too." John offered to travel together, and the girl agreed. Whether this trip took place is unknown, but John fell madly in love with Michelle. Upon learning about her 2 fiancés, he said, "I loved her so much that I didn't care." Now, how do you understand that? Do men ever think with their heads and not with other body parts? This story gets more and more confusing and intriguing with each section. A love quadrangle, lies, manipulation, all this cannot end well. But let's not jump ahead and wait for the denouement of this strange case. But before that, my friends, a very important point: the creation of such content requires a lot of time, and now my channel and I are experiencing not the best financial situation. I will be endlessly grateful to you if you become a sponsor of this channel and support me with your donation. And in return, I will be able to personally respond to you in the comments and also mention your noble name in my video. So become sponsors. I will be immensely grateful to you. In November 1995, Michelle started a major renovation of her house. John, without much thought, offered her to move in with him for this period. By the way, Kent and Scott also moved into John's place, although Scott lived there only occasionally when he was in town, as his work involved frequent business trips. Just imagine this situation: Michelle, Kent, Scott, John, and his son all living in one big house under the same roof. It's a real love quadrangle. What an unconventional family, right? I can't even imagine how they distributed responsibilities and built relationships in this format. However, it's worth giving Michelle credit. She managed to find common ground with John's son. Moreover, she practically replaced the boy's mother. She helped, supported, and was always ready to listen. John greatly appreciated this attitude and tried in every way to thank his beloved. For example, he fully paid for the renovation of her house and gave her a luxurious fur coat. And for Christmas 1995, John proposed to Michelle. Thus, now our heroine had 3 fiancés who literally showered her with jewelry, furs, and even paid for her car. Isn't that a fairy tale life? When information about this story reached the public, many compared it to the plot of an American sitcom. No wonder. A woman lives under the same roof with 3 men. They even have a schedule according to which she spends time with each of them in turn. And now this trio is on trial for the murder of one of Michelle's fiancés. Is this even possible in real life? Apparently, yes. This case is a prime example of what tangled love affairs and living large can lead to. Damn it, this is not fiction. This is a real situation. I didn't make anything up. You can even Google it yourself and check. At the end of December 1995, Scott had to urgently leave on business for California. That's when he decided to break off his relationship with Michelle. John and Kent were over the moon with happiness. Here's how John commented on this situation. My relationship with Michelle began to develop rapidly as soon as she broke up with Scott. It would seem that finally harmony reigned in this love quadrangle. Kent even called his parents and told them that he and Michelle were planning to get married, so they should get ready for the wedding. Oh, if only they knew what would happen next. However, on Christmas 1996, the unexpected happened. Michelle and Scott reconciled. The girl began to fly to him in California, and when she returned to Anchorage, she stayed at John's house. Kent was living separately at this time, but periodically visited his lovers. Soon he calls his mother again and says that he and Michelle want to finally set a wedding date. You see, Mom, Kent explained, Michelle wants change. She wants a real family, children. What a twist, and this after all her affairs on the side. And so Michelle and Kent return to their own house and open a joint checking account. Kent even makes a will in which he names Michelle as the main heir. Moreover, he takes out life insurance for her for a whole $1 million. It is worth noting that Michelle herself refused to make Kent the beneficiary of her insurance policy. The man's parents were extremely dissatisfied with this arrangement. They did not understand why such a large insurance sum was needed and tried to cancel the policy, but to no avail. And Kent's brother, Craig, bluntly told him, "Do you realize that this is dangerous for your life? You're in the crosshairs." How prophetic those words turned out to be. You know, friends, this story gets more and more complicated with each section. Relationships in the love quadrangle are changing at the speed of light, and now there's a $1 million insurance policy at stake. Something tells me this isn't going to end well. What's going to happen next? April 26, 1996 was supposed to be a special day for Kent and Michelle. They had set it as their wedding date. Kent's father decided to personally meet his future daughter-in-law and discuss the details of the ceremony. He came to his son, hoping for a warm meeting, but found only a confused and saddened Kent. It turned out that Michelle had simply packed her things and left. Kent was completely devastated, so his father decided to stay with him to support him in this difficult time. However, soon he had to return home to Michigan. He didn't even know that 2 hours later, Kent would send him and his mother 2 mysterious letters. Upon receiving the alarming messages, Kent's parents opened the first envelope. The letter said, "If something happens to me, open the second letter. But if the wedding with Michelle takes place, never open it." Frightened by such an ominous appeal, they immediately called their son, but he did not answer. It was decided to set aside the second letter for better times. On May 2, 1996, an ordinary service crew was heading to a remote communications tower near the town of Holb, Alaska. As the truck driver approached the facility, he noticed a red spot on the trail near the tower. Upon closer inspection, the man realized that it was a person in a red jacket lying motionless on the ground. It became almost immediately clear that this unfortunate soul was dead. An hour later, the police arrived at the scene, but there were no suspects at that time. Law enforcement officers thoroughly searched the area for evidence. Almost immediately, they managed to find spent cartridges. Examination showed that they belonged to a Desert Eagle .44 caliber pistol. Also, 2 different sets of footwear tracks were found at the crime scene. One track was left by the deceased man in red, and the other obviously belonged to the killer. A strange and eerie story, isn't it? A planned wedding that never happened, the mysterious escape of the bride, and then the murder of one of the participants in this love quadrangle. Moreover, the evidence found indicates that the killer was waiting for his victim near that tower. The only question is, who could it be? Could it be that someone from this company planned to get rid of Kent in advance? It's still difficult to draw any conclusions so far, but I feel that the investigation of this case will be extremely interesting and confusing. The police wasted no time and quickly identified the deceased. It turned out to be Kent Leppink. He had a driver's license, a checkbook, and an insurance policy on him. The most interesting thing is that just a few days before his tragic death, Kent for some reason changed the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. Now his father and mother were listed in this column. But here's what's strange: for some reason, the police papers did not indicate who the previous beneficiary was, and you and I remember that earlier Kent had written Michelle there. A coincidence? I don't think so. The detectives decided to examine the checkbook more closely and found out that Kent had a joint account with Michelle. Having learned her address, they went to her house. On May 5, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the police knocked on the door and began to ask Michelle about the nature of her relationship with Kent. The woman replied that they were unique, so complex and confusing that words cannot describe it. She tried to explain to the investigators their strange love quadrangle, which they did not yet know about. "I already have a boyfriend, and so does Kent, but he and I are not a couple," Michelle stated. "Do you think this clarified anything?" "I don't think so either." Next, the cops were interested in where Michelle had been all this time. She said that she had only returned from California a couple of days ago, where she had gone with Scott to the lake, and that she hadn't seen Kent for a long time. By the way, Michelle didn't even know about his death. It was the police who informed her of this news. The woman seemed to have been replaced. She began to sob, and when she calmed down a little, she told the officers that Kent was not really her fiancé. They said the engagement was just a cover for his non-traditional orientation. That's the secret. At that time, the police did not yet have any leads or theories about this murder, but soon they will appear, and from an unexpected source. Meanwhile, Kent's parents were informed of their son's death, and without hesitation, they opened the second envelope with his deathbed message, and there was a bombshell. "Michelle, John, or Scott are the closest people to me who could have killed me. Do me a favor, put Michelle behind bars for many years." He named himself a suspect. Of course, the parents immediately informed the police about this letter and also told them about Kent's $1 million insurance policy. And only then did the investigators find out that Michelle, it turns out, was simultaneously engaged to 3 men: Kent, Scott, and John. What a twist. I don't know about you, but I like this story less and less with every minute. There are too many dark spots and understatements in it. And these strange coincidences with the change of the insurance beneficiary and Kent's deathbed letter. It cannot be otherwise. Someone from this foursome is hiding something. We can only hope that the persistent cops will be able to unravel this tangle of intrigues and gain justice for the deceased Kent. Having received such intriguing information, the investigators decided to visit Michelle again. They were interested in whether anyone had a motive for killing Kent, so they began to ask more specific questions about the insurance policy. And then Michelle revealed an interesting detail. It turns out that Kent's life was insured for a whole $1 million. It was she who paid the premiums for this insurance. In her opinion, such a large sum could become a serious motive for the crime. But the police never managed to find out whether Michelle knew about the change of beneficiaries in the policy. Her alibi was ironclad. On April 25, she went to Scott in California and returned only after Kent's murder. But can she be trusted? Meanwhile, the news of the police's suspicions reached Scott. The man was shocked and outraged. To clear himself of the charges, he agreed to take a lie detector test. And what do you think? Scott failed the test miserably. Unfortunately, we don't know what questions they asked him, but the detective in charge of the case noted that polygraph results are not always reliable. And in general, Scott wasn't even in Alaska at the time of the murder. It's only strange that for some reason the police did not bother to check the data on his flights and calls. They didn't follow through, in my opinion. In the end, the cops' attention was drawn to John. They visited him at home, but the man assured them that he knew nothing about the murder. However, Kent's car was parked near his house, and in the glove compartment, the investigators found a very interesting letter. They christened it the Note of Hope. In it, Michelle asked John not to tell anyone that she would be in some kind of house in the city of Hobb, Alaska, and she hinted that she would not be alone there. The main thing is that John should keep his mouth shut and not report this to Kent. Michelle herself claimed that there was no house at all. And to be honest, John really had no property near Hobb. And what do we have? $1 million insurance policy, a failed polygraph test, a mysterious note. It seems that each of this trio is hiding something. But which one of them still dared to commit murder? So far, there is no answer to this question. We can only hope that the persistent cops will be able to unravel this tangle of secrets and lies, and you and I will follow the development of events. Investigators suggested that Michelle deliberately left the note where Kent could see it. In this way, she wanted to lure him to Hobb, and most likely, on the day of his murder, that's where he went. In my opinion, this is very similar to a pre-planned crime. But let's not jump to conclusions for now. Next, new information surfaces about that same insurance policy. Why did Michelle and Kent decide to take it out? It turns out that in February of '96, just 3 months before the tragedy, the couple in love met with an insurance agent. They told him that they were planning to take out a loan together to buy a fishing boat, and for this, they supposedly needed a life insurance policy. Moreover, both of them wanted to insure themselves for $1 million. But the agent explained that for such an amount, he could only insure Kent. As for Michelle, who was not going to work on the boat and was not yet an official wife, she could count on a maximum of $150,000. Something tells me that this insurance is the key to solving the murder. And not long before his death, Kent confessed to his lawyers that Michelle had been deceiving him. It turns out that she was stealing his things to make expensive purchases with his credit card. One of the lawyers advised Kent to break off the relationship immediately, because Michelle was unlikely to change. They say she will continue to spend his money and dance in that club. A few days later, Kent told another lawyer, "I'm going to be killed." The lawyer urged Kent to stay away from his brides and Michelle, and if the threat was serious, to go to the police. But Kent seemed to have lost his mind because of love. He could not leave Michelle. And what did he do after that conversation? He changed the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. A strange coincidence, isn't it? After the investigation reached a dead end, John Carlin Roman III and his son John Carlin Roman IV went to New Jersey. By the way, John S.R. had already spent almost his entire $1 million in insurance payments, which he received after an injury at work. And the lion's share of this money he spent on Michelle, so he had only pennies left. Meanwhile, Scott broke off all ties with Michelle and returned to his ex-wife. And our mermaid, if you remember, who danced at the club, returned to New Orleans and entered university. Life went on as usual, and one day Michelle met Colin Linehan, a medical student. She immediately told him about her past. And you know what he replied? "The past is in the past. We live on." Words of gold, in my opinion. Ha ha ha, sorry. In the spring of 1998, Michelle and Colin got married, and the following year they had a baby girl. Later, Colin became a military doctor, and the young family moved to Olympia, Washington. Michelle took care of household chores and earned a master's degree. She was actively involved in raising her daughter and even helped out at a local volunteer center. 10 years passed and no one even mentioned the murder of Kent Leppink. But in 2005, the case was transferred to the newly created Department for the Investigation of Especially Serious Crimes. Detective Jim Stock became the lead investigator in this case. While reviewing the materials, he noticed one interesting fact. It turns out that many years ago, the police had interrogated young John Carlin Roman IV, the son of John Carlin Roman III. But since the boy was a minor at the time, the interrogation was conducted in the presence of his father. And now John Roman IV was already 27 years old, and he practically did not communicate with his father. Detective Stock decided that this was a chance to learn something new. Perhaps the young man would want to talk about those long-ago events. So Jim and his colleague went to Tacoma, Washington. And there, John Carlin Roman IV told them that his father had bought a Desert Eagle 44 pistol shortly after the family moved to Alaska. And the boy also saw how on the day of Kent's murder, his father was washing this weapon with bleach. Then John S.R. told his son that this was the best way to get rid of evidence. The investigators also sent Michelle's laptops and John's desktop computer for examination. This equipment was seized back then, immediately after the murder, but for unknown reasons it was not thoroughly checked. And so in the fall of 2006, the detectives presented all the collected evidence to the Alaska grand jury. And although there was no direct evidence, the prosecutors believed that this was enough to charge Michelle and John with conspiracy and first-degree murder. That's how things are, friends. Even 10 years after the crime, new leads appear. And now everything points to the fact that Michelle and John were indeed involved in Kent's murder. And that constantly changing insurance only heightens suspicion. It remains to hear the verdict of the jury. When John Carlin Roman III learned about the charges against him, he immediately flew from New Jersey to Anchorage. On October 4, 2006, the man appeared at the courthouse, ready to fight for his freedom. Meanwhile, detectives visited Michelle's home to arrest her. The door was opened by Colin, the suspect's husband, who said that his wife was not at home. The police issued an ultimatum. Colin had only an hour to bring Michelle to the station, and soon the woman, accompanied by her husband and lawyer, crossed the threshold of the police station, and within a few hours she was already flying to Anchorage to meet her fate. In the spring of 2007, the trial of John Carlin Roman III took place. This high-profile case attracted the attention of the international press. The courtroom was filled with journalists and members of the public. No wonder, because in the dock was a young and attractive doctor's wife, who, moreover, was simultaneously engaged to 3 men. Everyone was interested in the spicy details of her personal life. How did she manage to live under the same roof with 3 suitors and at the same time make love with each of them in turn? But now she and one of her fiancés were facing severe punishment for the murder of Kent Lepping. The prosecutor built his case on the fact that Michelle allegedly persuaded Kent to take out $1 million insurance policy and name her as the beneficiary. And then John Carlin, in a prior conspiracy with the insidious beauty, killed his rival. They say the couple in love planned to share the insurance payout and live happily ever after. But their dreams were not destined to come true, because before his death, Kent had time to change the beneficiaries to his parents. By the way, the prosecution claimed that Michelle and John borrowed the idea for the murder from the movie The Last Seduction. It also told the story of a treacherous woman who persuades her lover to get rid of her husband for money. The lover ends up behind bars, and the beauty runs away with all the money. Something very familiar, isn't it? John Carlin's lawyer tried to convince the jury that her client was only a victim of Michelle's manipulations. They say this sly fox seduced the unfortunate man and then cruelly got rid of Kent in order to appropriate his wealth. And what about Michelle herself? She denied everything and accused young John Carlin Roman IV of the murder. This version was also supported by Scott Hilk, another ex-fiancé of the defendant. However, the most incriminating evidence was provided to the court by none other than John Carlin Roman IV. The young man told how on the day of Kent's murder, he saw his father diligently washing the weapon with bleach. They say Dad even explained to his son then, the best way to get rid of traces is to thoroughly clean the gun with chemicals. True, John Struner's lawyers stated that the boy was a capricious teenager with a difficult character who hated Kent and could have killed him himself. But the nail in the coffin of the defendant was the deleted emails that experts recovered from Michelle's laptop. In them, John wrote to his beloved about scandals and quarrels, threatened Kent, and showed crazy jealousy towards him. Sometimes these letters were somewhat vague and incomprehensible. For example, on March 17, 1996, 2 months before the murder, Carlin wrote to Michelle, "I'll call you as soon as I have them." The prosecution saw this as a hint at insurance documents. On March 31, Michelle herself mysteriously told Scott that she was expecting a cash flow soon, although she did not explain its source. And a week before Kent's death, John assured Michelle, "Everything will be fine, honey. Just wait a little longer and your life will change dramatically for the better. You'll see." The prosecutor emphasized that Michelle was obsessed with the desire for money and did not disdain any methods to obtain it. John, on the other hand, was obsessed with Michelle herself and was ready to carry out any of her orders. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On April 3, 2007, they finally announced their verdict. Guilty. John Carlin Roman III was sentenced to 99 years in prison. True, he was granted the right to parole, but he will be able to use it only after 33 years, at the age of 82. That is, in fact, it is a life sentence. In the fall of the same year, Michelle also appeared before the court. The girl was counting on a more successful outcome, because the main evidence was collected against her former lover, not against her. But witnesses were found who dug deeper. A former colleague of Michelle's from the strip club said that they had watched that infamous movie, The Last Seduction, together. And then Michelle allegedly said that she would not mind being in the place of the main character of the film. Scott Hilk, for his part, suggested that it was the young John Carlin Roman IV who could have shot Kent. They say the boy himself boasted to him on the phone that the murdered man had been shot in the stomach, and this at a time when neither the press nor Michelle nor Carlin SR knew the details of the crime yet. So where could the young man have learned such details? Most likely he himself was present at the scene of the massacre. However, despite all the efforts of the lawyers, on October 22, 2007, Michelle was also found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge aptly remarked that there is no difference between the puppet that pulls the trigger and the puppeteer that pulls the strings. The defendant was sentenced to 99 years in prison. One could end this eerie story here, but fate had its own plans. Shortly after he began serving his sentence, on October 27, 2008, other prisoners brutally dealt with John Carlin Roman III. Such a sad finale for a loser lover. True, after his death, the heirs began a legal battle and still managed to overturn John's sentence, citing indirect evidence of his guilt. Michelle's relatives also filed an appeal. They argued that the judge of first instance made a fatal mistake by admitting inadmissible evidence into the case testimony about the movie and Kent's deathbed letter. After all, the defense had no opportunity to interrogate the deceased and clarify the context of his message. And what does some thriller have to do with it? In the end, the Court of Appeal agreed with this and overturned Michelle's sentence for lack of evidence. What an unexpected twist. Two former lovers suspected of a brazen murder are set free. Who could have predicted this? But despite the tragic nature of this story, it seems that Michelle managed to start life from scratch. Now she lives in Seattle with her loving husband Colin and daughter, working as a laser technician in a clinic. To her credit, Michelle did not even demand compensation for her wrongful imprisonment. The story of a love quadrangle that led to a horrific murder has finally ended. It intertwined passion and jealousy, greed and cold calculation. And despite the numerous evidence, we still do not know for certain who was behind this crime. Perhaps someday the secrets of the love quadrangle will be fully revealed, but it will happen without our participation. If you liked this video, don't forget to support our channel with likes, comments, and subscriptions. Sorry that this story turned out to be somewhat creepy and convoluted, but that's the specifics of my work. That's all for now. This was Detective Brooks. Until next time.